So Jessica is giving me permission to introduce myself here. So, okay. So, yeah, I just want to reflect a little bit. I think Michelle and Mark did a masterful job of touching on some of the information. I know we're on a campus today with 3 universities, 3 colleges, so you guys are getting a lot of information today intentionally here. But they started to talk about, we've heard presentations on climate, on housing, talking about homelessness, talking about infrastructure. And I love Mark's phrase he just used. We've got a system of systems. So a lot of what we want to do with you guys from this point forward this afternoon is talk about that integration and how various systems are interrelated, and you can't talk about climate without talking about water. You can't talk about jobs, as Elizabeth did so masterfully, talking about jobs, spend the night in a home. So we're going to be talking about some of that integration here. So I've put this title on my session here, Already Not Yet. We're going to talk a little bit about what Colorado has done. Some of it has been good attempts. Some of it we've had some challenges. And we're going to do a little comparison of what is happening around. Again, Michelle did a great job introducing us to some unique solutions that they're trying in Illinois here. So we'll go forward with that. So just last day being a professor, sorry. Just a quick historical perspective that we're tying a lot of this into basic, how do we do planning and decision making here, and with a particular focus on Colorado. So we've had planning and zoning that a lot of you are familiar with. Some of you may know about it, just kind of on the sides here a little bit. We've had it around for about 90 years. And there's been somewhat of an evolution. So in the 60s and 70s, we decided to move away from what were just laws that enabled you to do planning. You were allowed to do planning, but weren't necessarily required to do it. So in the 60s and 70s, we had several states be a little bold and take a step forward and say, we feel we need to move beyond enabling legislation and begin to put some mandates and requirements out there as frameworks to help local jurisdictions do a better job of tying land use to transportation, to housing and environmental issues. Let's give Colorado a pat on the back here for being one of those trendsetters there. But the story isn't over at that point. So we'll continue it through. I'm actually going to move to the next slide here. So in the 80s and 90s, we actually had more states decide to join the bold ones here and create new frameworks, and we'll talk a little bit about what's contained in some of those frameworks for their counties, municipalities, and so on. You see one state up there at the top, though, that decided to go backwards. So Colorado is the only state to have ever rescinded planning legislation that it had put in place. So we experimented a little bit for about 4 years and decided we're just going to go back and just allow planning to be enabled. So let communities do what they want, with the exception of what Amanda Sandoval said in her presentation. We do have this thing that tourism is something that is required for local jurisdictions to do. That's a fascinating story. I'll tell it to you at another point in time. So as we go forward then, we see more and more states are finding opportunities and ways to evolve how they deal with planning, with environmental programs. What you see there with the states in different shades of blue are states that have followed the lead that Colorado once held back in the 70s to come up with more sophisticated integrated frameworks to bring issues together. Light blue states are doing it just a little softer with programs that they develop at the state level for their localities. California and North Carolina have a little different color there, so they separate their counties. So those counties that are along the water, so the coastal counties there, have a certain set of expectations and requirements that they plan with, but they're different in their inland counties there. And then the counties in green, both dark green and kind of that light green hue there, have focused on using the environment as an integrated framework there. So here's just another way to look at it, is just a spectrum, kind of listing out all the states here. So you have the states on the right that have these more integrated frameworks, either around planning and decision-making in total or around environmental statutes. And then you get to kind of the softer approach on the left. And Colorado kind of is not in the top half, shall we say here. So how does Colorado compare with some of these others? So, you know, we've got 16 states now that have very comprehensive integrated approaches for how they address planning and many of the issues we've been discussing today. 12 states do this through more rigorous environmental programs. We already mentioned that Colorado tried in the 70s to do this, rescinded it. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few other slides. So we've already said this, so yeah, we actually started with the Land Use Act pretty modest in early 70s. We gave it a little bit more rigor in 74, but by 4 years later, we ended up repealing it, and again, the only state to have gone in that direction here. We have a lot of background information on this and many of the other issues we're discussing with you on the website, so there's a pull-down menu you can get into to look at some of this. The governor in the 90s, Roy Romer, was getting a pulse. He said, we really do need to do growth management sorts of things here, but wasn't sure we had the political appetite to go back and re-engage what we had done a decade or so before. So he came up with this Smart Growth Initiative, which was do a lot of this voluntarily. So maybe we can try to do this without regulations and so on. I'm smiling here. I see Randy over there in the corner who actually worked with the state, worked with Governor Lamb. Did you work with Romer administration too? Okay, yeah, so he's got some battle wounds from that period of time here. What we found with this is there were a lot of awards given to places that were doing great things. We didn't really call out places that weren't doing great things. That is part of the overall equation here. And again, a lot of the national assessment was, you know, what we're doing in Colorado is just very limited. And what's particularly interesting is a lot of these programs just lasted for about 12 years. So why 12 years? Election cycles. So we've got three-period term limits here in Colorado. So a lot of the elected officials that oversaw some of these efforts initially were replaced by a new generation of elected officials. Came so close in the late 1990s, early 2000s, so there was a movement to try to reestablish growth management. I see Rich over there shaking his head. He probably has some battle wounds from that effort, and came so close. That's the point in time where tourism and recreation were added as something local jurisdictions needed to do. But when we went to act on an entire package, it fell short in the legislature. In the 2010s, this is an interesting story. The American Planning Association, I know we've got a lot of folks here affiliated with that organization here this afternoon, tried again and again and again. I mean, this is a state that has serious issues with water, water supply, water quality, drought conditions, all of this. You know, can we at least ask jurisdictions to address water in the local plan? Goes into the legislature, it fails. Goes to the legislature again, it fails. So third time's charm, or is it? I mean, the third version of what we finally did pass enables local jurisdictions to address water if they so choose. Okay, so we're kind of in that mode here as a state, and that's the current state of things here. So we'll take a quick look at what some other states are doing. Some of the colored paper on your table we'll work on a little later, but that summarizes some of what we're showing here. We should have mentioned too, Jessica, we forgot to at the top of the program here. So you have a QR code, so you can access all of this individually on whatever little electronic gizmos you have there. So you can have your own version as well as the one set we left at each table here. So I'm going to start with Oregon and Vermont first because they came online about the same time that Colorado did. So both of those states just focus their framework on what localities should do. So in Oregon, there's no like statewide plan that's required or anything, but they have created a framework that says local jurisdictions need to work on these sets of issues when they go through comprehensive planning. It took a while from their initial efforts in the 70s to grow into this, but this has just become kind of a routine there. Similarly, in Vermont, you see some overlap, some of the same issues, a few issues a little distinct there in Vermont as well with their program. And then you start to see some jurisdictions that develop some more integration. So what's interesting with Florida, again, a lot of overlap with the issues there, but what Florida has done is created a statewide plan. So there's a state plan that addresses all of these issues. Then the regions in Florida have to address these issues too and reflect what's in the state plan. And then each locality, each county, municipality does that as well as their own comprehensive plan. You know, some people like to distinguish Oregon, which is just here's things that localities do, that's kind of a bottom-up approach. Florida might be called a little bit more of a top-down approach because you have the state plan and then the regional plans nested in that as well as the local plan. There has been some modification of Florida's law over the years. So, oops, I see Rodney giggling here. So he has some Florida time in his history here. But again, I mean, basically that framework continues to operate. New Jersey is another place just a little interesting for us to think about if we're looking at models and thinking about what are some possibilities for Colorado. There's a statewide plan and then local plans. And interestingly, the counties serve as kind of a go-between in the function. So they look at the statewide plan and they look at the local plans and see if they mesh. Okay, so a little different approach there. Much more modest list, although the last one's kind of open-ended relationship with other plans here. All right, and then some of the newer generation of places. So Georgia came up with a system where, again, there's this modest set of issues, but they're moving away from the just kind of stacking and listing and just talking about these things in isolation, this topic, this topic, this topic. They're beginning to show these topics relate to each other. And so it's a little bit more modest framework than some of the other states we've looked at, but this governs state planning, regional planning, local planning. So all of that is integrated in the Georgia model. And Washington State, where I've spent a lot of my professional career, plagiarized Georgia, to be honest here, and did something very, very similar in context here. What's interesting in the Washington context, so there's no statewide planning. There's an interesting provision in Washington's law that state agencies have to demonstrate that their planning is consistent with local plans. I mean, whoa, that's kind of a unique thing. And it's played out a lot in terms of certain transportation projects where the state wanted to do something and the locality said, you know, we're not looking at that type of widening or investment there. Okay, so they have regional policy. Each county then works on a set of policies with their municipalities and then the local level. Finally, here's a California example. We don't always like to look at California for examples here in Colorado, but I mean, this one's simple and somewhat elegant here. So this is regional planning. Again, this is legally binding. that this sort of framework is used, but I mean, very recent. So you're seeing mobility, climate, housing, and equity all needing to be addressed in that framework. Colorado, and I won't go into this a lot, but we've mentioned it already. There's a list of items that, again, are optional for jurisdictions to consider. The State Department of Local Affairs does a nice job of providing examples, best practices, and some guidance there. But again, we don't have this required. We have no schedule for timelining or timelines are going forward. Okay, so just quickly, we've been saying this. We're moving to recognize these things are all integrated and interrelated here. So a couple of models we'll let you work with when you have your next discussion time here. So this is one that has been developed by the American Planning Association. Oops. Okay. And again, it's working really with that concept Mark introduced, systems of systems. So we don't layer out all the different, water, air, soil, climate, natural habitat, and so on. We take all of those together within the natural system. Same with the built environment. I mean, that's housing, that's our road network, that's our infrastructure, it's our consideration of community character, social systems as well, economic systems. I mean, it resonates a lot with what Madhvi said at the beginning here about circular economies and regenerative economies here. And again, within the framework of communities being healthy and connected. And this is a modest thing our team is kind of playing with to offer you guys. So it's taking a lot of these issues and, I mean, can we go from kind of layered suggestions, if you will, of things you might do in your plan to something that begins to capture integration. So, I mean, we're just throwing this out as something we thought of, but this needs to go on a little bit of a journey, and that's part of why you guys are here today, is to spend some time with it. All right. I think we are ready to transition to our panel, and I see that Jessica is calling folks to the table here. So, all right. So I see Alfonso and Jasmine I saw, and Mayor Stout. All right. And I'll let you do the introductions here. Thank you, guys.